Hey everyone, it is Chris, and I've been talking about the damage capabilities of various classes over the past several weeks. And what I do is I do damage calculations and compare them to each other. Because the thing is when we look at a class and its features, as well as subclasses, we get gut impressions as to how good they are. And when it comes to a lot of factors, gut impressions are all we have until we get experience. But with single target damage, we can actually do the math and see how they do and compare to each other. And so today with the Druid, it is definitely a special case because I've done 2 cautionary videos so far, and both of them are on spells that Druids get. So there's Conjure Minor Elementals, which I figure the scaling is out of whack. So I think Conjure Minor Elementals is fine as a 4th level spell, but as we start to upcast it, it just scales too quickly. And it puts it way out of whack with everything else. And then I did one on Conjure Woodland Beings. Now, that video was also somewhat about Spirit Guardians and Yolande's Regal Presence, but I was focusing on Conjure Woodland Beings, also a Druid spell. And in that case, I was talking about a particular tactic that can get out of hand and couldn't take over your game. And my solution personally for these kinds of things is to avoid banning things. I don't like to ban stuff because if something is supposed to be an option for a class, I don't want to take that option away. I also don't want it to be a must-have so that it ceases to be an option and all the other things that were supposed to be options aren't. So what I do try to do is figure out how to keep things balance so that the Druid can select Conjure Woodland Beings or Conjure Minor Elementals and have them still be good spells for them, but not be spells they must have. And part of my considerations on that is looking at their other options and making sure that those are viable. So what I wanted to do today, when I'm looking at Druid single target damage, is look at some of the other spell options they have and see how they do. So I am going to be looking a little bit at Ice Knife, which is a single target damage spell. I mean, it's technically area of effect, but it's mostly single target damage. I'm going to look a little bit at Flaming Sphere. I'm going to look a lot at Conjure Animals, which is totally redesigned in the new rules and redesigned from the playtest because I have experience with it in the playtest. It was a lot of fun. I'm not sure why they changed it, but I want to see how it does now with the changes. And Conjure Fae, which looks like it has maybe not as strong at first level, or the first level we can cast it, but also looks like it has really good scaling on it. So I'm going to be looking at all those options and see how they do. And I want to look at the Moon Druid. The Moon Druid, I mean, we have lots of subclasses that are damage focused. So the Valor Bard, for example, is obviously a way to focus on weapons and single target damage for the Bard. The Blade Singer is the same for the Wizard. The Berserker Barbarian is that way for the Barbarian. And the Moon Druid is that for the Druids. But the thing about the Moon Druid is because they are using, they're not using templates, because they are using stat blocks, it is harder to get a gut impression. So that's why I really wanted to look at the Moon Druid to see how they're actually going to perform in gameplay. So if you are not subscribed, subscribe now. But we are going to be looking at some graphs, and we're going to be comparing the Druid in terms of single target damage to the other classes that I have done so far. Okay, so the base build I'm going to do, I call the Druid Spell and Cantrip base build. You could do a melee Druid, and you'd get different numbers. I decided to start with Cantrip, and then I'm going to use about half my spell slots on spells to deliver damage. Obviously, we'll focus on our Wisdom, so we'll start with a Wisdom of 17. For feats, I took a mix of different kinds of feats. Warcaster will help us by increasing our Wisdom. Wisdom plus 2 at level 8 will help us as well. And Boon of Combat Prowess at level 19 will help us all offensively, as well as other things as well. But I kind of went for a mix of different kinds of feats that I thought were good, even though they're not all offensive feats. Assumptions I'm going to be making: 4 combats per long rest, 4 rounds per combat, 1 short rest in the middle. I am assuming concentration is held for 1 combat, 4 rounds. Could be longer than that, could be less than that, but that's my assumption. Spells with a 10+ minute duration cast before combat 50% of the time. This is a change, so I want to talk about this. Like I said, I like to be transparent about my assumptions, and one of the assumptions I've made in the past is that if you cast a spell that has a 10 or higher minute duration, you can cast before combat all the time. And it has been criticized that, that's not always the case, and that's true. So I have altered my assumptions, starting with the Druid. So we are going to be casting 10-minute duration or higher spells in round 1 half the time, and half the time I'll assume we've cast it beforehand because, we were in a dangerous situation and we're like, better get that spell up, and then when initiative is rolled, it's already up. So half and half. The spell I'm going to be using as a cantrip is Starry Wisp. That's a new Druid cantrip, ranged, and it's fine. And then approximately half spell slots for damage. First level spell I'll be using is Ice Knife, which is mostly single target damage, and I won't be using it very long. Level 2 spells I'll be using Flaming Sphere, also won't be using it very long, but you'll get an idea what it does. And then I'm going to do Conjure Animals, and I'm going to upcast Conjure Animals with my 4th and 5th level slots. Then I'm going to switch to Conjure Fey. Conjure Fey, I think, starts out with not super impressive damage, but the scaling on it is nice. So by the time we're using late 8th level slots, I think it does pretty good damage. And Conjure Fey has an additional effect as well of frightening the target. Now, I should mention with Conjure Animals. So with Conjure Animals, we have to guess how often we will be applying the saving throw. And if we move the Conjure Animals, which is free, within 10 feet of an enemy, they'll get a saving throw. And if they move into the area, they get a saving throw. If they end their turn in the area, they get a saving throw. We can only move our Conjure Animals 30 feet, so there might be occasions where we can't move it far enough. I decided to just go with once per turn. But I do think if the situation is right, you could definitely get more than once per turn. And if the situation is terrible, you might not even get once. So I went with once. Okay? And let's see. So on the chart here, the left side is the level. The middle side is going to tell you what spells I cast, how many actions I had to spend on casting spells, as well as other relevant features. And on the right side are my DPR calculations, which I am not going to go through. But if you want to pause the screen, the math, I've tried to make it as clear as possible what I'm doing. If you notice a mistake, by all means, let me know. So with the Druid, we're going to start out with a 3.2 DPR, which is low. This should not be a surprise. If you are going to play a Druid and you're going to focus on throwing cantrips, you're not going to do a whole lot of single target damage, definitely at low level. And then level 3, we go up to 4.7. Level 4, we get up to 9.5. And then we get up to 14.5 once we get potent spell casting. And we start using Conjure Animals at this point. And the Conjure Animals damage looks alright to me. And it scales fairly okay with level. It's about 0.8 damage per spell level per round. Right? And that's if we cast it once in one combat over 4 combats, like once we divide it out. It's actually much more than that for one attack. And then level 9, 20.2, 26.6. Then, well, I should make sure I take some time in case you need to pause your screen. 28.3, 34.2, 47.2 once we get Foresight. And Foresight, by the way, I should mention Foresight works with Conjure Fey. And the reason it works with Conjure Fey is Conjure Fey says that it's you making the attack. So unlike summon spells, where your Epic Boon of Combat Prowess would not apply because it's not you making the attack, with Conjure Fey it is, which is nice. So we get a nice boost there. At level 19, 58.1, and it also applies to our Foresight, by the way. Okay, that's what I meant. And then at level 20, 63.2. So let's take a look at it on a graph. Okay, so here it is. I am comparing it to the Warlock baseline, which is a Warlock using Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast, and Hex. And I figured this is a good comparison because we have two what are generally considered spellcasting classes using a cantrip, using their concentration and seeing how they compare against each other. And what I see is, so the blue line, by the way, is the Warlock baseline. The red line is the Druid baseline. The Warlock out damages the Druid from level 1 through 8. Level 5, it's pretty dramatic. What do we got? 9.5 to 16.6. Druid pulls a little bit ahead at level 9. 11 and 12 are basically the same. Druid pulls ahead again at 13, then a fair bit at 15 and 16. Then in tier 4, looks like it's pretty close between the two. Warlock's a little higher at 17 and 18, and the Druid's a little higher at 20. Overall, depends on your tier of play. I mean, if I'm playing from level 1 through 8, the Warlock is better. If I'm playing from levels 9 through 16, the Druid is better. And overall, I'd say it's similar. It depends. It depends what levels you're playing at. If I'm playing from level 1 through 20, they're fairly similar. That's actually kind of nice to see, right? Like you would assume the Warlock, just using Eldritch Blast, might be your best cantrip dealer, but it looks like the Druid can keep up for the most part. So that's kind of cool. Let's see what the Moon Druid looks like. So Wild Shape and Spell Druid build. So we're going to use the Moon Druid, and I want to actually talk about the Moon Druid for a bit. So Moon Druids get this feature, Circle of the Moon spells. It says, when you reach Druid level specified in the Circle of the Moon spells table, you always have the listed spells prepared. In addition, you can cast the spells from this feature while you're in Wild Shape form. It includes Cure Wounds, Moonbeam, Starry Wisp, Conjure Animals, Fount of Moonlight, and Mass Cure Wounds. Now, that does not mean these are the only spells you can have active while you're Wild Shaped. Like, I could cast Conjure Woodland Beings and then Wild Shape, and I still have Conjure Woodland Beings, and I'm concentrating on it, and it's fine. However, if I'm already Wild Shape before combat begins, and then I need to cast a spell, if I don't want to drop my Wild Shape and then have to re-Wild Shape, then it's a lot more convenient to use these spells, and a couple of these are single target damage spells. I was using Conjure Animals on the previous build. I didn't use Fount of Moonlight, so might be interested to see how that does. That one is going to give us 2d6 damage to our melee attacks, which should be good for a Moon Druid. So I'm going to use these two spells. Conjure Animals and Fount of Moonlight might get different results if we use spells that aren't on this list, but I do think these will be the most convenient for a Moon Druid to use. And so the starting build is basically the same, except we've added Moon Druid, the same feats, the assumptions. I just point out that as long as we stick to spells that are on that list, whether we're Wild Shaped at the beginning of combat really does not matter, right? Because we can cast the spells whether we are Wild Shaped, and if we aren't Wild Shaped, we can Wild Shape as a bonus action, then cast a spell as an action, and then we're good on round 2. So we can do those two things together. And so I just listed the spells that were available. I decided not to use Moonbeam because it uses all of our actions in order to move it around, which I figured we would probably need to do, so it didn't seem like, the way to go with a Moon Druid. We're going to use as many 4th level slots as possible on Fount of Moonlight, because I do think it will probably outdamage Conjure Animals. And then I'm going to use the highest level slots available for Conjure Animals for the other combats. And both use a round 1 of a combat 50% of the time. All right, so we got to talk about Wild Shape. So the 2024 Player's Handbook contains a number of beast forms, and there's lots of selections for a Moon Druid at CR1, and there's one selection at CR4. Your best selection for a Moon Druid in terms of offense for CR1 is the Lion. It just has better attack rolls, better damage, it has pack tactics. It's just a good form for combat. So I took a look at that form, and then I looked at the Elephant, which actually also looks pretty good. So like the Lion has 2 attacks, plus 5 to hit, d8 plus 3. The Elephant has 2 attacks, plus 8 to hit, 2d8 damage, plus 6. And so what I think presumably what we're supposed to do for CR2, 3, 5, and 6, until we get the 2024 Monster Manual, is to use the 2014 Monster Manual. But there's just not good selections in the 2014 Monster Manual beyond CR1, really. And so, based on what I saw with the Elephant and what I saw with the Lion, I gave some best guesses what our best form might be capable of based on different challenge ratings. So for example, with CR2, I figured we'd probably get 2 attacks at +6 for D10 +4. And CR3, 2 attacks at +7 for D12 +5. And then at CR5, 2 attacks at +9 for 2D10 +7. And CR6, 2 attacks +10 for 2D12 +8. And if you look at the lion and you look at the elephant, and you consider the CR difference between them, you probably can see where I came up with these numbers. And these are estimates and guesses. This could change when the 2024 Monster Manual comes out, but I think these might be close to what we have. So this is what I'm going to use, because I want to see how the Moon Druid's going to do past February of 2024, and I think this will give us more accurate numbers than using the 2014 Monster Manual for forms. And because we are not using templates, because the community really didn't want to use templates for Wild Shape, we will be using stat blocks. And because we are using stat blocks, the scaling of your to hit is not really going to match the scaling of the to hit for weapon users, which is unfortunate. It also makes the math a little more difficult. And basically what I have to do is I have to compare the chance to hit of the wild shape form versus what a weapon user would have and adjust our chance to hit accordingly. And I'll just tell you, based on what I looked at, well, we are wild shaped as a Moon Druid. We're basically going to be looking at either a 50 or 55% chance, base chance to hit, unless we get advantage or something like that. And so our chance to hit is going to be a little bit lower than somebody using a weapon. So I've taken that into account, and it meant a lot of math because it kind of jumps back and forth between 50 and 55%, and we'll see that on the graph as I will show you here. But level 1, 3.2, I mean, level 1 and 2 are the same. Then level 3, once we add wild shape and we take our lion form, is 11.5. So big jump at level 3. Then it goes down at level 4 to 10.8 because our chance to hit goes down. Then 14.4 at level 5, 17.1 at 6, 22.5 at 7, 20.4 at 8, so it goes down again. Level 9 is 24. Level 10, yeah, I'm not going to fit this all. Yeah, I can fit it all on the screen. Okay, so 26.9 at level 10. Level 11, I am not going to fit it all on the screen. So some of these had a lot of math. So there's the first half of level 11. There's the second half of level 11, and it's 29.5. Level 12, I think it's going to be the same thing. So there's the first half. There's the second half, and it was 40. There was a lot of math punching on this one. Level 13, first half. Second half, 37.7. 14 is up to 45.6. 15 is 54.1. Same for 16. We had foresight at 17. We go up to 66.4. Level 18 to 72.5. Level 19, 83.7, and we finish off at 84.5. So let's look at that on a graph, and what I'm going to compare it to is I did the Warlock baseline versus the base Druid. So let's do the optimized Warlock baseline versus the Moon Druid, and then we'll check the Blade Pact versus the Moon Druid. So the red line is the Druid with Wild Shape, and the blue line is our optimized Eldritch Blast build. And they look very, very similar until we get to level 13. Now you can see the red line is weird. And this is the effect of not using templates. If we're going to use stat blocks, we're going to end up with stuff like this. So level 1 and 2 are the same. Then it goes way up at 3. Then it goes down at 4. Then, it goes up at 7, down at 8. It goes way up at 12 and down at 13. And that's just the result of using stat blocks. But overall, for those first 13 levels, they're very similar for damage. And then level 14 up from there, the Druid just out damages the Warlock by quite a bit. So let's look at it versus, because we are going to be doing melee, right? And so this isn't necessarily apples to apples anymore. But if we compare it to a Blade Pact Warlock, I think that's a pretty good comparison. So the blue line is the Blade Lock, and this was the charisma-based Great Sword Blade Pact Warlock. The red line is the Moon Druid, and with a very small exception at levels 13 and 14, they are very close from level 1 through level 20. At 13 and 14, the Blade Lock comes out well ahead. So 57.1 to 37.7 at 13. Quite a gap there. But most of these levels, and I mean it goes back and forth. Sometimes the Druid does more, sometimes the Warlock does more. And, at level 20, they're almost exactly the same. So very comparable results, I would say, between a Blade Pact Warlock and a Moon Druid, if they're both using their spells to try to improve their damage. Very, very close numbers. So I decided to compare this to a martial build. So the green line is an assassin using a heavy crossbow. And what I see is the Moon Druid and the Blade Lock do, for the most part, less damage in Tier 1. And they do less damage through all of Tier 2. Both of them do. When we get to Tier 3, then it kind of goes back and forth. The assassin is kind of in the middle. Blade Lock probably is doing the best damage at Tier 3. And then Tier 4, the casters outdamage the assassin, but not by much. So that's not bad, because you get to be a caster and do competitive damage. On the other hand, let's remember that the assassin is at range. There's an advantage to that. Assassin's also doing poisoning after level, I think it's 14 on with this particular build. And so we got to take that into account as well. They have better skills, but they don't have like all the ritual spells, and it's complicated. What I do notice though is, the Druid, it's a little wonky because it likes to go up and then down and then up and then down, and the other classes aren't like that. But nevertheless, if we take it as a whole, it looks competitive, maybe a slight bit on the low side in Tier 1 and 2, I would say, but not disastrously low. By the time we get into the mid-Tier 3, then it's doing pretty good. So, like, at really high levels, that's a good time to play a Moon Druid, which is kind of the reverse of 5e. In 5e, at level 2, Moon Druids, like, exploded. And then they very quickly fell off in terms of single target damage. So quite a change there. But these don't look all that unbalanced against each other. So that's kind of nice to see. And that is the Druid. And what I would probably think of looking at next is the Bard. Because the Bard, we have the Valor Bard. And I think that people are really interested in knowing what kind of damage we can expect from Valor Bards in 2024. Let's find out. And once again, I'm not going to concentrate on Conjure Minor Elementals with the upcasting presented in the Player's Handbook, because I'm not going to play that way. And I assume a lot of my viewers, having been informed by me about the dangers of that, won't be playing that way either. Be aware that if you use Conjure Minor Elementals with a Valor Bard at high levels, you can do a ton of damage. I don't need to show you that again. Let's see what we can do if we don't do that. Okay, so that's going to be my next build video. And until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.